អង្គុយចុះ
Please be seated. The court is now back in session. The floor is once again given to Nuon Chia's defense to put further questions to this witness. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Kuen, before the break, you stated that there had been no meeting where it was announced that Nuon Chia was in charge of the Ministry of Propaganda. Is it a correct summary of your words to say that you concluded, based on Nuon Chia's activities at the Ministry of Propaganda, that he was in charge of the Ministry of Propaganda?
Response. I already stated that already, but let me add to it. Based on his actual work there, and I as a staff member there, I observe it. Previously, there was Hunam, and then he was replaced by Junjat. And after Junjat left, Nuon Chia took over. So whatever happened at the upper level regarding the appointment or the reshuffling, I did not have that knowledge. But I saw him coming to work there, and he was about the people, the staff there. So he was in charge. It is in that sense that I previously stated, and there was no meeting announcing him taking over. No such meeting. He came after Junjat. So I repeat again, after Junjat left, Nuon Chia came, and I did not know about the arrangement at the upper level. And based on that fact, I made a conclusion.
Thank you for that answer. You were asked by the investigators of the OCIJ whether you ever attended a meeting conducted by Nuon Chia, and your answer was, I think if the meeting was ever conducted, there might be very few small meetings. And this is a quote from document E3/438, English ERN 00375874. My ERN is 00373434. Yesterday, you were asked a related question, or you were asked whether you ever attended a meeting that was chaired by Nuon Chia, and your answer was, again, if I did, there would be very few meetings, nothing major. Perhaps it was to reiterate previous instructions, for example. be clear, this is not a quote from the transcript, but a quote from my own notes. My question to you, Mr. Kuen, your answers indicates that you are not sure, you're not certain whether you ever attended a meeting that was chaired by Nguyen Chia. Is that correct? Are you not sure whether you ever attended a meeting chaired by Nguyen Chia?
Response. I was asked that question yesterday and I already responded. And my response today is the same as I said yesterday. I never attended any major meetings, but for smaller meetings I attended a few. And as I said, I was a technician and I could not leave my work. And I also hate my supervisor. And of course, the meetings between my supervisor and others was above my knowledge. I only knew and focused on what I was assigned. And whether my supervisor had a meeting with him, I could not say, or if there were, what the meetings were about. I only attended a few smaller meetings, but not the major meetings, and I cannot recall the content of the details of the meetings that I attended. So I would be assigned to do my work by my direct supervisor. That was all, as I stated yesterday.
And just to be clear, I understand that you attended only smaller meetings of less importance. Do you remember, or don't you remember, whether Nguyen Chia chaired any of those smaller meetings? If you don't remember, that's perfectly fine.
Response. I stated earlier already that I attended the daily meetings chaired by the head of the department. I can say that I attended a few smaller meetings chaired by him, but I could not recall the content of the meetings. And for those big meetings, I did not attend.
Thank you. That is clear. You have stated that you heard on the radio that Nguyen Chia was a member of the standing committee. Can you tell us when you heard this on the radio?
Response. Regarding the date or whether it was in the morning or the afternoon, I could not say. So I did hear that on the radio, but I cannot tell you the date. as I cannot recall it. I cannot recall whether I heard it in the morning or in the afternoon broadcast.
I understand that you cannot recall whether it was in the morning or in the evening, and it doesn't need to be that specific, your answer. Can you tell us which year you heard this announcement on the radio?
Response. I cannot tell you that, as I cannot recall what year I heard about that broadcast on the radio. I think at that time it was an opened announcement on the radio, but I simply cannot recall the year of the broadcast. It was an opened broadcast on the radio.
And if you cannot remember the exact year, can you remember whether it was broadcast soon after you arrived at the Ministry of Propaganda, or was it more towards the end, before, more towards 1979, when the Vietnamese came?
Response. Previously, I did not know him, nor did I hear about that announcement. But I cannot say for sure as to when I heard that announcement on the radio, but it was probably toward the end of the regime, before I left Phnom Penh. As I said previously, I only knew Hu Nam, and after his disappearance, I saw Yun Jad. And it was kind of new for me when I was transferred to work in Phnom Penh in that ministry. So actually I saw him at the ministry, and later on I heard the announcement on the radio. I think I recall that now.
And did you know what the standing committee was when you heard that Nguyen Chia was a member of the standing committee?
Response. After I heard that, I never tried to analyze what the standing committee was. There was no clear guideline or information as to what the standing committee was. And as I said earlier, I already knew about my work, and later on I saw him and I knew him, and that Nguyen Chia was a member of the standing committee, and that he was the second person after Pol Pot. But I heard all these words, but I never tried to understand more. I tried to analyze that Pol Pot was number one, and Nuon Chea was the second one. I tried to analyze that. No, I did not do that. I simply learned that he was the second person after Pol Pot.
And just to be clear on that last issue, who were the people that told you that Nuon Chea was the second in command after Pol Pot?
Response. I cannot recall the names of those people. But when I finished my shift, I left my work, and then when I was sitting and chatting with other people, I heard them talking about that. But I did not pay attention to it or tried to analyze it.
Okay, that is clear. We have spoken before about Mr. Kim Voon. Mr. Kim Voon has testified before this chamber, as I told you before. And he has testified about the Ministry of Propaganda. And he has also testified about the role of Yoon Yat. And Mr. Kim Voon explains that there were two ministries. On the one hand, the Ministry of Propaganda and Education, and on the other hand, the Ministry of Education. Mr. Kim Voon has stated before this trial chamber that Yoon Yat stayed in charge of both ministries. And she stayed in charge of both ministries until the Vietnamese came. That means until the 6th of January 1979. According to Kim Voon, Nuon Chea came to the Ministry of Propaganda only when Yoon Yat was absent, and Nuon Chea would mainly occupy himself with the education program on agriculture. Kim Voon also testified that Nuon Chea did not work at the ministry on a permanent basis. And Mr. Kim Voon furthermore testified that there was no other minister than Yoon Yat assigned to the Ministry of Propaganda. That is the testimony of Mr. Kim Voon. You know Mr. Kim Voon. You have testified that you have worked with Mr. Kim Voon at the Ministry of Propaganda. My first question to you is the following. Do you know whether the statement by Mr. Kim Voon is true? The statement that Nuon Chea mainly occupied himself with the education program on agriculture. Do you know whether indeed Nuon Chea mainly occupied himself with the education program on agriculture?
President, witness, please wait. The prosecution, you may proceed.
Mr. President, an objection. I think if counsel is going to ask the witness about specific testimony of Kim Bun, he should be quoting it and providing transcripts. We dispute his characterization of that testimony. My recollection is that Mr. Kim Bun simply provided his information as to what he observed when he saw Nuon Chea. He certainly did not speak to everything that Nuon Chea would have done at the ministry. So I think counsel is mischaracterizing the evidence, and that he should, if he wants to ask about specific testimony, he should be quoting it and providing the references.
I'm happy to do so, Mr. President, and obviously the testimony of Mr. Kim Bun relates only to what he has witnessed himself. That is what we are here to test. But I am more than happy to run through the transcripts of Mr. Kim Bun's testimony. It will just be more time consuming. I think the more pointed questions would be more efficient, but I'm in your hands.
President, the observation by the prosecution is appropriate if you quote from a transcript. You need to provide the document ID and the relevant EN number and the date, the line, or the page number of the transcript, so that other parties can also review that quote.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will then proceed, and because I just summarized parts of the statements of Mr. Kim Bun, I will now read them out, and bear with me, it will be slightly tedious. But for the record, I will proceed. Document number E1/113.1. English ERN is 00841885. Khmer ERN is 00838789. It is the transcript of trial day 101, and the date is the 23rd of August 2012. And on that page, a question is asked to Mr. Kim Bun relating to these two ministries that Yoon Yat controlled. Do you remember, Mr. Kim Bun, around which year Yoon Yat started to control these two ministries? Mr. Kim Bun answers, I do not remember precisely, but she could have been controlling these institutions between 1977 or 1978. Question, and to your knowledge, Mr. Kim Bun, did Yoon Yat stay in charge of these two ministries until the Vietnamese arrived in January 1979? Mr. Kim Bun answers, yes, she did. She stayed in charge until then. This is the first quote supporting what I just said, that according to Mr. Kim Bun, Yoon Yat stayed in charge until January 1979. On page 29 of the same document, and the English ERN for that is 00841881. Khmer ERN is 00838786. Question is asked to the witness, and the question is the following on line 12. You said you know that Mr. Nuon Chea was the chairman of the People Representative Assembly, but apart from his being the People's Representative Assembly, did he have any other function? And Mr. Kim Bun answers, I already stated that when Ms. Yoon Yat was absent, Mr. Nuon Chea was attached to the propaganda section on education programs. He was there to disseminate information concerning agriculture. The information he quoted from a thick book by the Chinese expert, and also he instructed people at the editorial department in that propaganda section. And then, same document, 00841888. That's the English ERN. Khmer ERN is 008388792. Question was asked on line 15. Mr. Kim Voon, do you stand by that statement today that the leadership role at the Ministry of Propaganda was not Nguyen Chia's task? Answer by Mr. Kim Voon, in that only when Ms. Nguyen Yat was present that he would come and replace her, and with regard to the agricultural programs, he would be the one who was in charge. And then on in document number E1/112.1, English ERN is 00841179, Khmer ERN 008398886. That's a repetition of what I just quoted, so that leaves me two more pages. Would be again document E1/112.1, English ERN 00841211, and Khmer ERN 00839911. And those are questions by Judge Lavergne. And the question is on line 18. So can you tell us a bit more about what Nguyen Chia was doing at the Ministry of Propaganda and Education? And the answer is, actually, Mr. Nguyen Chia had a role in the education program. The education program was on agriculture. He brought a thick book by the Chinese experts in which he quoted one page at a time for the education purpose. That's what I learned back then. And then moving over to the next page, which is English ERN 00841212. And the Khmer ERN is for that 00839911/12. And it's again a question by Judge Lavergne. And the question is, in line 8, did he replace Mrs. Nguyen Yat, or did he simply come to assist her, let's say? And Mr. Kim Voon states, his fundamental program was the new education on agriculture, and I have no other knowledge of his involvement in other section in writing. In particular, because I had been transferred to the Cambodia Krom Radio section when Ms. Nguyen Chia was assigned to the propaganda department. He only came most often when Nguyen Yat was not present. So that is for the transcript of Kim Voon's testimony. And my question to you today is, do you know whether that is true, the statements by Mr. Kim Voon that Nguyen Chia mainly occupied himself with the education program on agriculture at the Ministry of Propaganda? Do you know that? Do you have any information on that issue?
President, witness, please wait. The prosecution, you may proceed.
Mr. President, we'd have no objection if counsel rephrases his question to ask him if he has knowledge about Nguyen Chia's role on education, but he continues to characterize the testimony that this was Nguyen Chia's main occupation when he's just read a statement where the witness clearly said that he had no knowledge of Nuon Chea's other activities at the ministry because he had been transferred to the Kampuchea Krom radio section. So I have no objection if he wants to ask the witness an open question about this issue, but he continues to mischaracterize the witness's testimony.
Mr. President, perhaps the best way is to simply quote from the transcript. And again, I will quote Mr. Kim Voon's transcript on page 29, English ERN 00841881, and then Khmer ERN 008388786. And I quote Mr. Kim Voon, and Mr. Witness, I'm now quoting from Mr. Kim Voon's statement. I already stated that when Ms. Yunyat was absent, Mr. Nuon Chea was attached to the propaganda section on education programs. He was there to disseminate information concerning agriculture. The information he quoted from a thick book by the Chinese expert, and also he instructed people at the editorial department in that propaganda section. My question to you, Mr. Kim Voon, Mr. Kiewen. Mr. Kim Voon was at the Ministry of Propaganda, and it is his testimony that when Mrs. Yunyat was absent, Mr. Nuon Chea was attached to the propaganda section on education programs, and that he was there to disseminate information concerning agriculture. Can you confirm or contradict that statement by Mr. Kim Voon based on your knowledge at the time?
Response. This person, as I only knew his alias back then, provided that testimony, and I cannot, of course, judge his testimony. The reason for that is we did work separately. So for him, he knew about what happened at his section, or the instructions given from the upper level to him. And for my section, I only knew about the work at my section. And it had nothing to do with my section of what's going on at his. And in my section, as I already stated, the upper level did not come to my section often, but I believe that his section, the upper level, came often to work with his section. So I, of course, cannot say whether his statement is correct or not, because we worked in a separate section with different skills. He focused on his work, and I focused on my work.
Thank you for that answer.
President, Council, could you advise the Chamber as to how much time you still need, and have you consulted with other defense teams regarding time allocation? As you are aware, the time allocation for the 3 defense teams is 1 day, and you already started your time in the later session yesterday afternoon. So if you take quite a longer time, then the time will be less for the other 2 defense teams.
Thank you for reminding me of that, Mr. President. I have conferred with the other teams before questioning commenced. I understand, but happy to be corrected, that the Kyosampan team has very few questions and that the Angsari team also will not have too many questions. So it is our expectation that we can finish within the 1 day allocated to the defense. So, Mr. Kuen, I'm not asking you to judge or assess Mr. Kim Voon's testimony. That is not my purpose. I'm asking you about the role of Nuon Chea. And my question is the following. Do you know, based on your own experience, what the substantive work of Mr. Nuon Chea was at the Ministry of Propaganda?
Response: that I do not know. The reason why I said that I did not know, because as Chaum mentioned, he had met with Nuon Chea, but it was entirely his business. I did not know what they had discussed. But for me, I did not know the task of Mr. Nuon Chea. I could only describe what I had met with him, but I did not know what Chaum had testified before this chamber. And it was entirely his business. I did not know. As for myself, I did not know what Mr. Nuon Chea was responsible, and I did not know what Mr. Nuon Chea had discussed with Chaum, because it was the business of Chaum. I did not know.
I understand that. You just stated that the upper level came often to the section of Mr. Kim Voon. Can you explain why the upper level came often to the section of Mr. Kim Voon?
Response: Mr. Kim Voon's section was responsible for writing news, and it was actually the drafting section, and they prepared a writing script for a radio broadcast, and they would send information to us as well. I actually did not know the details of their work. I only knew that it was the place where they prepared scripts for others.
And according to, let me rephrase that, and let me again give you a specific quote of Mr. Kim Voon on English ERN 00841885, Khmer ERN 00838789, and document E1/113.1, transcript of trial day 101. Again, the question about the two ministries, and I quote, "Do you remember, Mr. Kim Voon, around which year Yoon Yat started to control these two ministries?" Mr. Kim Voon answers, "I do not remember precisely, but she could have been controlling these institutions between 1977 or 1978. Question, and to your knowledge, Mr. Kim Voon, did Yoon Yat stay in charge of these two ministries until the Vietnamese arrived in January 1979? And Mr. Kim Voon answers, yes, she did. She stayed in charge until then. End of quote. Mr. Kyo En, considering this testimony by Mr. Kim Voon, and based on your experience at the Ministry of Propaganda, do you think it is possible that Yoon Yat in fact stayed in charge of both ministries until the Vietnamese came, and so also stayed in charge of the Ministry of Propaganda until January 1979? And is it possible that she simply had to divide her time between the two ministries and therefore was not that often at the Ministry of Propaganda?
The President, witness, please hold on. Prosecutor, you may proceed.
Yes, Mr. President, we'd object to this question. Counsel is now asking the witness to speculate based on the testimony of another witness as to what Yoon Yat was doing. The witness has already given us his recollection of events. He shouldn't be asked to speculate about such matters.
I'm happy to rephrase the question, Mr. President. How often did you let me rephrase that question again. The two ministries that Yoon Yat controlled at a certain point, were they in different locations in Phnom Penh?
សូមឆ្លើយសំណួរនេះ
Response. The two ministries were located in different locations. But the Ministry of Propaganda were in the same location when Hu Nam was the minister as when Yoon Yat was the minister.
And just to be clear, because different names are used for the same ministries by different people, how did you call the two different ministries? What were the names you used for the two different ministries?
Response. I am not 100% sure of the correct names of the ministry. But what I am sure of is that the two ministries were in different places. One of the ministry was named Ministry of Propaganda and Information, and the other ministry was called the Ministry of Education. I am not 100% sure, but it may be somewhere around these two names. But I may not recall the exact name of the ministries. But later on, it was called Ministry of Propaganda and Education. So it has been merged into one ministry called Ministry of Propaganda and Education.
And you say it was merged at a certain point. As far as you know, was it ever split up again, these two ministries?
That I do not know. I do not know whether or not this ministry was later split. And if it was the case, I did not know what the exact names of those ministries. But once Yun Yat left, then Nuon Chea came to take the responsibilities.
And do you know what Yun Yat did when, according to you, she left the Ministry of Propaganda?
Response. Actually, when she came to take charge of my ministry, I did not know the internal arrangement, but when she left that ministry, I did not even know anything about her departure. But for clarification, when Jun Yat came to take charge of ministry, I was in charge of technical aspect. I did not know her day-to-day work schedule. And when there was a decision to remove her from that ministry, I did not know the internal arrangement at the upper level.
And do you know when, according to you, Mrs. Yun Yat was removed, do you know where she went to work?
Response. What I knew was that she no longer worked in the Ministry of Propaganda and Education, and I did not know her portfolio after that. I did not know whether or not she was still indirectly supervised the ministry. But what I knew was that I no longer saw her at the ministry, and then Mr. Nuon Chea came to take charge of that ministry. I did not know whether she returned to her previous ministry, and I did not know her exact portfolio, to be precise. Thank you.
And to come back to my original question, which was, do you remember where these two different ministries were located? Where in the city were they located?
ខ្ញុំ
Response. The ministry that also housed Office 33, and it was located south to Lycée Descartes. It was located in a building close to the public park east of Buddhist stupa. And at the time, that was the location, but I think that the building was demolished, or that I don't know if that building was still there. I could not really locate the place because there has been a lot of changes since then. But as for the ministry under the management of Junjat, was located somewhere close to Boracay.
Just, it may be my understanding that is off, but just to clarify, was the Ministry of Propaganda near the Lycée Descartes or near Boracay? Could you clarify it? Maybe just my lack of understanding.
Response. Ministry of Propaganda is adjacent to Lycée Descartes. It was situated south of Lycée Descartes. But as for the Ministry of Education, it was in one location somewhere near Boracay. It was south of Boracay. When the two ministries was merged, I learned the news about the location of former Ministry of Education. I asked my colleagues, and they told me the location of the office of former Ministry of Education, but I did not myself know exactly where it was located.
Okay, that is clear. Mr. Kim Woon describes how, as far as he could tell, Nguyen Chia came whenever Ms. Nguyen Yat was absent and would replace her. But Mr. Kim Woon states that this happened on an intermittent basis. So he states that Mrs. Nguyen Yat came back and forth to the ministry, and that Nguyen Chia would mostly come when Nguyen Yat was absent. Did you witness the same phenomenon?
Response. That answer belonged to Mr. Kim Won. As for my answer, what Mr. Kim Won saw was in relation to his work. As for me, my work had nothing to do with his work. I did not know the communication between him and Mr. Nguyen Chia, and I did not know whether Mr. Nguyen Chia came to his place or not. I only knew when Mr. Nguyen Chia came to my place, and I think that Mr. Kum Won must have known more than I did, because Mr. Nguyen Chia may have visited him more often, and I dealt with technical aspect. I only knew when he came to my place.
And your place, where you were working, can you describe that a little bit more for us? Was it a room in an office building, or was it a separate house? Could you tell us a little bit more?
Response. As a matter of fact, my workplace was located in a building, in one building block. There was one big building, but my office was in a separate small building where we had equipment to get our job done, and it was in a separate building. As for Mr. Kim Won, he worked in a main building where there were many staff members working there. But as for my section, it was in a separate building. Because at Mr. Kim Won's sections, they were responsible for preparing script. So there was one section dedicated to that team, and they were located in the main building. And my section was a separate building, and the buildings were adjacent to one another, and it was within one premise.
You say they were adjacent, these buildings. Could you give us an estimate as to how far apart they were from one another?
Response. At the time, that building complex were the old buildings left from the previous regime. And the section where I worked was part of the Ministry of Propaganda office. And actually it was a vacant office. It was not used for some time. And it was used as a warehouse before we came in. And when we arrived there, they told us that they brought in equipment from other places. And then we were trained how to use the equipment over there. But before, I did not know what this building was used for, but I came in this building later on, and I knew that this building was before vacant.
Thank you for that answer, and perhaps my question was not clear. Could you tell us how far your building was from the main building where Kim Woon worked? How many meters? An estimate is good enough.
Response. In my estimation, it was in one building complex, but it was separated into different sections and offices. I did not know whether or not this structure was still there, but the building was adjacent to one another, but there were the roads in front of the office and at the back of the office as well. So it was in one complex. And there was one main building over there, and there were smaller offices adjacent to the main building. And I was located in the smaller buildings adjacent to the main buildings. That's what I can respond to you in relation to this question.
And yesterday, you stated that you did not leave your workplace. Is that correct?
Response. When I was working in Office 33, I could walk freely in the building complex, but I did not interfere in other people's affairs. I had to mind my own work. And we had a separate dining hall and a place to sleep. So we could walk within the building complex, but we did not bother into other people's business. We had to mind our own business. I had to handle my task, a day-to-day task, and when I complete my task for the days, I would return to my place to rest for the day. That was it.
And you stated yesterday that Nuon Chea did not have his own office, but was working from a certain space within the Ministry of Propaganda. Would that certain space have been inside that main building that you just discussed?
Response. Yes, his space was located in the main building.
And could you tell us a bit more about what sort of space that was, if it was not a proper office?
Response. He worked in the office inside the main building, but never had I entered his office. I had never knocked on his door and got into his office. There was people working outside his room, and whenever I went inside the main building, I simply handed in the documents, and then there were people who continued to relay the message or delivered the documents to him, and I did not enter into his office.
Could you tell us a bit more about that? Because it seems that yesterday you stated that Nuon Chea did not have a proper office within the Ministry of Propaganda. And what you're saying today is, at least sounds like he did have his own office. Could you explain the contradiction?
Response. Let me clarify it. it appeared that there was no separate office dedicated for him. There was a table in the main hall working with other colleagues in the office as well. But once again, as I said, if anyone from other section wanted to see him, then they simply would submit the document to people over there who work closely with him. And I was working in another section, so I did not have close contact with him. If I wanted to deliver any documents, then I would pass to his associate over there. And I think that he would walk freely within the office, and as far as I was concerned, I simply met with his colleague over there. I would give documents to his colleague, and then I would return back to my office.
Thank you. And one more question about this issue, and it's not because I doubt your description, that is not why I'm asking this question, but I simply want to understand. Just now you stated that you never knocked on his door, and I understood that to mean that there was a certain door behind which Nuon Chea worked. Can you explain once more what, as far as you know, the working conditions of Nuon Chea were in that Ministry of Propaganda, in that main building?
Response. My answer was not different from what I stated earlier. Mr. Kum Won had more frequent contact with Mr. Nuon Chea. Mr. Nuon Chea might have instructed him, but as far as my role was concerned, my visit to his office was very brief generally. So when I went there, I only saw him briefly sitting at a table, and I passed the document to his colleague, and his colleagues would hand in this document to him. That was to the best of my recollection of the event at the time. I did not understand any details because I did not have a close relation. I did not receive direct instruction from him. Whenever my job was done, I would return back to my section. The President, thank you. Council, the time is now appropriate for lunch adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn now until 1:30 this afternoon. Court officer, please arrange the place for the witness to rest during lunch break and have him back to this courtroom before 1:30 this afternoon. Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Nuon Chea is suffering from a headache, back pain, and a lack of concentration, and would like to follow the proceedings from his holding cell, and we have prepared the waiver.
The President. The Chamber notes the request by Mr. Nuon Chea through his defense counsel to follow the proceedings remotely for the remainder of today's proceedings due to his health concern. He cannot sit in this courtroom for the entire day, and the defense counsel has notified the chamber that he would submit the waiver to the chamber immediately. The request is granted. Mr. Nguyen Chie is allowed to follow the proceeding from the holding cell downstairs, where the audio-visual means will be connected for him to follow the proceeding for the remainder of the day. The chamber also notes that Mr. Nguyen Chie has expressly waived his right to not to be present directly in this courtroom. The defense team for Mr. Nguyen Chie is advised to submit the waiver with the thumbprint or signature of Mr. Nguyen Chie to the chamber immediately, and AV assistants are instructed to connect the audio-visual equipment to the holding cell downstairs, where Mr. Nguyen Chie can follow the proceeding remotely from the holding cell for the remainder of today's proceeding. And security guards are instructed to bring the co-accused to the holding cell downstairs. Mr. Nguyen Chie is to remain in the holding cell, where he will follow the proceedings remotely by audio-visual equipment, and Mr. Kyu Sampon is to be brought to this courtroom before 1:30. The court is now adjourned.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ